Okay, everyone, welcome to Eminence TV, our weekly rundown of tournament cEDH and what's going on in the cEDH community. I am Adam, better known as Poppyphobia, and as you can tell, this week I am hosting all by my lonesome. Shauna, unfortunately, has to be at work today, so it is just me today running the show. Joining me is a reoccurring guest on various Eminence programs, Greg, better known as Curious Control. And before we get started, we would like to thank our sponsors of Eminence. So thank you to Moxfield and the Epic Storm, without whom none of this would be possible. If you are enjoying Eminence content and would like to see more, please consider subscribing here on Twitch. If you have Amazon Prime, you can subscribe to one channel a month for free, and we'd love it if you'd consider using that on us. We're also on Patreon at patreon.com/eminencemtg. Your pledge there goes to improve the programs of Eminence cEDH University, among many other things like supporting the Eminence media team and casters like myself. This week, we're discussing cEDH tournaments, the abundance of them, what players like Greg and myself do to prepare for them, and help others to get involved in playing EDH competitively, as well as highlight some of the upcoming events in the future. So, now that that's out of the way, to get us started, Greg, why don't you tell those who may not know who you are a little bit about yourself?
Hi everyone. I'm Greg. I play Curious Control, but I also just play all sorts of just dedicated reactive and control decks in competitive Commander. Um, I've tried a bunch of different kinds of things, and I brew stuff constantly. Always down to chat about whatever. If you guys can find me on any Discord servers or Twitter at Curious Control. That's about it. Oh, I have a podcast now. So you can find that pinned on my Twitter account, or it's the Past Priority Podcast on YouTube, and I would gratefully accept any support you have to offer.
Yeah, speaking of, why don't you tell us a little bit about the podcast? How's it been going? I know you're kind of new to the podcast world, the Past Priority Podcast. I've been listening along. I've been enjoying it, but how have you enjoyed making it so far?
It's been quite the process. Um, at first, I wanted to make it an audio only podcast, and then I went down all these rabbit holes of like, ooh, I can do fun visual effects in After Effects, or what happens if we put card images on the screen? What happens if we start to incorporate video? And it went from like, oh, this project is going to take me like 2 hours to record and then like 2.5 hours to edit, and now it's like 2 hours to record, and the last episode that I edited took like closer to 7 or 8 hours, which is not great for what my schedule is, but we're working on it.
Yeah, something that I learned very early in the podcast world was you want to edit as little as possible.
Oh yeah.
I think we got ours down to like it takes like an hour and a half to record, and it takes like 15 minutes to edit, and then the rest is just upload time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I got to get mine down to like an hour to edit, and I'd be happy with that, but
you just got to
I
do what
can't
we do.
spend an entire afternoon.
You got to tell your guests like, hey, don't say anything that you don't want anyone to hear because we don't edit anything. So you just gotta one take lariat, you know.
Oh yeah, it'd be risky, but I should
But
try that.
it's hard. Like you get used to it after a while. But yeah, it's a little difficult to just kind of ramble and not make any mistakes or leave a lot of dead space.
Hmm.
But other than like the Past Priority podcast and Curious Control, I know that you've been pretty involved lately with cEDHU. So I know that you did, I think, their first ever seminar, and then I know that you did the Eminence TV live for an episode, and then now you're doing another seminar. So do you want to kind of plug that seminar and kind of talk about what you're going to be doing tomorrow?
Yeah, so we got so Evan and I are running a seminar tomorrow afternoon, and we're basically just going to be chatting about approaches to the formats and misconceptions that people might have when coming into cEDH. Um, we're trying to be really open about this discussion because it's a really complicated topic. So right now, without spoiling too much, we're just going to be talking about some pretty basic stuff, and then hoping that Twitch chat drives some of the conversation into the deeper subjects, and we'll be able to elaborate on any questions that people have.
Yeah, that's awesome. So if you haven't heard, cDHU is doing a seminar program where, and I believe it's set up this way, but if you're a patron, there's like a live chat, and you're able to partake in the seminar, ask questions live, and get feedback while listening in from experienced players. Also, that are most of them are also mentors in cDHU about the format cEDH and learning from it, and basically answering any questions you've ever had about it. And then those videos get posted to YouTube, and sometimes if they're streamed on Twitch, and they're free to everyone else at like a later date, which is like the week after, or like a couple of days later, once Mike gets the chance to edit them. But it's really cool and it's really awesome. The seminars are a great way to help newer players get into the format, and like it's less intimidating than say just trying to ask a random stranger that you see playing a game like, hey, can you tell me about cEDH? It's also
Hmm.
probably less I would say not invasive, but less what would the word I'd be looking for? Sometimes it can be really harsh if you're asking cEDH from a very opinionated person, and they might give you the wrong impressions of what the format really is, especially here in the online community where I think cEDH really flourishes. I feel
Mhm.
like it's definitely a different vibe in the online community comparative to like in-person cEDH, especially if you don't have a really big local scene. So
Yeah.
cDHU is like an awesome resource that I recommend to anybody who hasn't checked it out yet.
Yeah, I agree. Um, Specifically, like people online, sometimes because there isn't that face-to-face conversation, will just like be really harsh and bold about their opinions. But if you can find the right people and you can have the right conversations, you can really learn a lot about everything, the format, the meta,
Yeah.
gameplay.
And speaking of the format is really growing at this point. I think to a rate that people maybe hoped that they would see, but didn't know was really possible like these last few years. Um, to the point now where we have like several in-person cEDH tournaments around the nation, as well as online events firing basically monthly at this point, which has never really been the case. Like for the longest time, like there was Monarch was doing like cockatrice tournaments, and then Playing with Power had their leagues going on, but there was never really like a solid foundation for cash tournaments with like well supported price support. And we're getting to a point now where they're firing pretty consistently. For long extended periods of time. Like right now, we have a chaos tournament going on tomorrow, then Mox Masters going on in December. Then you have Silicon Dynasty, which is an in-person tournament in January, and then like every 2 or 3 months after that, you've got more in-person events going on, as well as like Oktoberfest is going on in the middle of this month. We have 2 tournaments this month alone. So the format is really getting to a point where it's being, I would say, like popularized, and it feels very very healthy. I don't know if you would agree with me there, but just like it feels to me like cEDH, and specifically like tournament cEDH, is really like at a point where it's like flourishing at a level that I don't think most people expected. So um, as for us as players, we've had to put a lot more focus on playing at a comp REO level, specifically because that's kind of what the desire of cEDH really is like at its highest, at its like perfect definition, we're playing EDH at a competitive level. So like learning the game, learning the comprehensive rules, playing at comp REO level, it's something that a lot of us have had to kind of transition to and focus on more, because that's kind of where the meta is shifting a little bit more towards geared towards tournaments, because that's the only place that you can really showcase like your skills as a player outside of just jamming games with your friends. So like in saying that, what changes have you kind of noticed in the community as these tournaments have started to spring up more and more, and people have been getting more invested into playing in these events?
So in playing into these events, I'm seeing less rogue decks, or when players do bring rogue decks that don't work, they quickly change it to a deck that does work or historically has worked. Um, uh, you see this often on the Playing of Power server because that server is really oriented for new players getting into cEDH, and most games you play there will have one person in it who's just like playing a brand new deck and they don't really know what they're doing, or it's cEDH but it's missing 15 staples, and so it's just kind of like tuned high power, and they end up losing a lot of games. But they learn pretty quickly because they're practicing for these events. They want to play in these Mox Masters. They want to play in all these tournaments going around, and you learn pretty quickly by losing that you have to improve your list. You see this all the time. People will start to pick up better decks. They'll start to pick up the blue farms, the Grixis piles of the world, and perform well with those, hopefully.
Yeah, so like that's something that I think I've noticed as well, is like as people shift more towards like a tournament mindset, the decks that you used to see like kind of widespread throughout the community aren't being showcased as much as they once were, right? And then as new players like play in these tournaments, those decks, I wouldn't say get weeded out, but you start to understand as a player the power discrepancy between lists, right? So like a good example of this is like in the last Mox Masters tournament where I played, a player brought Yawgmoth Thran Physician, right? Now Yawgmoth is a very powerful deck, and for like a mono black list, it does pretty well. But when you bring it to a competitive environment where it's kind of, I wouldn't say cutthroat, but like everyone is trying to win this game here, and it isn't just like a casual vibe, and people are mulliganing very aggressively and really like trying to win the game. That deck starts to perform weaker than it would previously. Like when you're playing with your friends and I keep a first 7 no matter what it is, just because it's got lands in it, compared to like when I'm mulling down to 5 and I have, mana rocks and a win con. It's like, it's a different level, right? And
Yeah,
people start
it certainly is a different level of play.
yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, and so like that's an example of like after that game that me and that player had a discussion where I was like, listen, if you like enjoy Yawgmoth, continue to play it. But if you're disappointed with how it's performed in this setting, maybe this isn't the right list to bring into this type of environment. Now, if you have the goal of like breaking this list, right, and trying to make it competitive at that highest level, then by all means continue to strive for that. Other than that, my recommendation is that I think that you should maybe look at another list or try a different strategy, because otherwise you're going to continue to feel disappointed with your performance. And you can be one of the best players out there, but if you're better than your deck, sometimes there's not a lot that you can do to change the outcome of a game. And that's something that I had to discover like very early on in my like tournament experience. Was like I used to jam like Jessica Ishai, and that was like my favorite deck. I never played anything but Jessica Ishai, and I got really good at it. But like at a certain point, your deck can only do so much, right? And like a lack of colors and a lack of strategies that you can implement really showcase like the weaknesses that your decks may have. And so that's something that I think like tournament play really like changed my opinions on how I viewed the format. And so for a lot of new players, I think like what my job is as an enfranchised player is to try to help them like make that jump before they lose interest in the format. And that's something that I think that a lot of people underestimate, like when you're talking about like how when you introduce new players to cEDH, like what do you discuss? I usually talk about like, well, what's your goal? Are you just playing like to have fun and like play with friends, or do you want to like play in these tournaments and try to win some money, or stress test yourself on how competitive you can play? Because if that's the case, like, I wouldn't bring Selvala to a tournament,
I mean, so this is where I think we might have different views on format philosophy. Because so going back to Jessica Ishai, right? You said that you stress tested Jessica Ishai to its limits, and you found those limits in a tournament setting, right? Well, I think this is a weird and hard discussion to have. But there are different ways to approach winning the game, and of course, in a tournament setting, the goal is always to win the game. And if colors were limiting and strategies were limiting to how you would win the game, we wouldn't see people like Charles bring mono white to the top 4 of Punt City, right? I mean, decks are always going like you can have competitive decks, and it doesn't have to be a 5-color storm pile or the the Rogsais of this world, where they're just the fastest lists out there. Those, like, a Rogsai is hard stopped by a Trinisphere on turn one, or two pieces of interaction, a Rogsai is dead in the water. And so I think there's just different ways to approach a tournament setting and approach bringing a deck to maximum power level. And it's like Mono Green Selvala. I lost to Yisan at Punt City. It's just a bunch of like weird rogue decks. I mean, rogue being like Yisan is an established deck that has been around for God knows how long, but it's not something that you would even consider top tier when you put it next to Najilo or Kenrith or Rogsai or Winota or anything like that. But it's still a competitive deck. It can still win the game pretty efficiently. It has very compact, very concise directed lines, but it just approaches that path to winning differently. Because it may try to, it still finishes with a combo, but it also plays stacks and it ramps in its own way. I don't. I think it's wrong to say that lists are limited in competitive nature specifically by color, because like a mono white probably can't do a turbo strategy as efficiently as something that's a Grixis core base. But white can do stacks better than Grixis can, and stacks has an equal chance of winning the game that a Grixis Nospile.
Yeah, I think I can agree with some of the points that you made there. I think this is kind of like a discussion topic that I knew that we would kind of delve into, because I do know that we do have like very differing opinions on format philosophy. Something that I always say, and I'm quoted on saying it quite often, is that like in my opinion, right, when it comes to cEDH, every deck has a puncher's chance. It's like boxing, right? So like if you step in a boxing ring, if you throw a hard enough punch, yeah, you could knock the guy out, right? But there's a difference between like having a puncher's chance and being Mike Tyson or Muhammad Ali, right? Some guys are just better than the rest, and if you knock them out, like that's great, but you got to look at the factors of like, how did that happen, right? Did they not see it coming? Was there did they make a mistake, right? That's kind of how I feel when it comes to like limited colors, right? Specifically, like the example I brought up was like Jessica Ishai, right? I when I played that deck, I played it a lot, and what I felt as a pilot was that this deck was nearly identical or no different to Blue Farm, except it lacked black, which brought consistency to the deck that is Blue Farm, right? It had everything else that Blue Farm had. It does Underworld Breach lines. It has different tutor targets. It has commanders in the command zone that apply pressure in the game. They just don't have card advantage, and it doesn't have the same tutor density that a deck like Blue Farm has. So my own concession as a player was that I'm limiting myself by playing this list over another, and when I'm performing at my best, that lack of consistency, right? Tutors and card draw and things like that were leading me to losing more games, where if I was just playing the other list, I would probably be winning more. Now, when you bring up something like Charles, right, and stacks and mono white, I think that's a different idea, because you're looking at now a different strategy or archetype. And something that I think like Charles is pretty open about is that not everybody can pilot the same decks to the same level of success. And I think that kind of comes into like the idea of like, where do you want to be as a player, right? So like another good example of this is like Fonzie, Mythics Gaming. He plays Crick, and he consistently like plays very, very well with Crick and does really well with the list. Now, is that because Crick is an amazing list? I mean, I think Crick is probably the best mono black list out there, or is it because that as a pilot, Fonzie's just levels ahead of other players? That's what I think of Charles when I think of mono white stacks, right? Is that like I could give any new player a mono white stacks deck, and you're probably not going to perform well with the list, because there's a lot of things outside of just the game actions that you take that really affect how you play the game. So like the politics at the table, the way that you have to divert threat assessment, the different stacks pieces you have to put down, you have to have enough game knowledge to know you're putting down the correct pieces that are affecting the game in that moment, right? I know that there's like a lot of people that like really preach like the turbo stacks mentality of like you just get a rule of law on turn one and everybody's screwed. But like as the format's progressing, we're learning that that's like less and less effective, especially if you have to develop a board state, which a lot of stacks decks do. You have to develop this board state before you can kind of win the game. And so what happens is when you run into things like a dress down, and someone can just win on the turn they're ready to go off because of how they've sandbagged their interaction or how they've built their deck. Certain archetypes become less effective unless you're a really good pilot, and you can anticipate those things and play around them really well. So there's certain factors that I think play into that type of mentality, and like with like the Yisan example, something like that, there's an argument for rogue decks winning because of ignorance, right? If other players at the table don't respect a deck, it doesn't matter how good it is. If people aren't showing it the same respect as other lists at the table, there's a lot of ways that you can eke out wins. Like a good example of that is like Ryan Coibito with Magda at Marchesa. I've heard Ryan say it himself that like if people just like read my cards and knew what they did, they would have they would have respected it a lot more than what I was shown, And going 7-0 is like an amazing feat, and like that's a testament to Ryan as a player, but also a testament to how much the other players at the table just didn't care about what his deck did, because it was a mono red deck and that thing can't be any good. So why should I care about it, right? So I think as these tournaments progress, I think more players are showing a little bit more onus towards these rogue decks, and that's going to affect their performance as time moves on. But I'd love to hear like your ideas on format philosophy and like what your opinions are of like the rogue deck idea, and like specifically like what how players that are like good pilots at their list can kind of get more wins than maybe someone who's just playing the best list.
Yeah. So so I'll bring this point to you mentioned dress down as like why play stacks when the other decks can just sandbag interaction and their cards until they eventually hit their dress down and then just win because all the stacks is nullified. Well, that mentality is saying that my deck beats this other deck because I run one card in my deck that beats that list. Because dress down lets me get ahead of the stacks, or stacks is now irrelevant because dress down is in my list. Because dress down can hit play, make stacks null, and then win from there. Well, that same argument can be the stacks deck puts down a null rod, right? And now your Adnaz list, now your Rogsai is nullified until that list can find that Rogsai list can find the interaction for the null rod, right? But the point about stacks and the point about these mid-rangey and these more rogue decks that want to have the game go longer is that by the time the other players find the answer for whatever you've put into play, that rogue deck has hopefully put 2, 3, or 4 more of these effects in play that layer, and they're diverse enough that it's really hard to break out of that lock without something like a Cyclonic Rift protected by a rule of law because someone overreached. And if played correctly, stacks is really hard to break out of. And I just wanted to say it's kind of a weak argument in my mind to say that like, dress down just nullifies an entire list, because at that point you're rating cards on best case or worst case scenario, and that's just I don't know. Finding the middle ground on a card is worth it. But taking the topic to how can rogue decks really improve and how rogue decks can perform at tournaments, and it's really just about understanding their deck. I don't know if you have any experience with the video game League of Legends, but there is a character Yasuo in that game, and there's always these memes going around the internet about how Yasuo is the champion with a very high skill cap and a very low skill floor. And that's how I see rogue decks in cEDH. You can have players who don't know what they're doing at all and are just bumbling around, and they will never win a game, right? But once you see that player like truly like play thousands of games on this list, or hundreds of games in the case of cEDH, it gets to the point where you have to respect them because they've built up all this experience. They know their deck in and out. They can tell you every single line. So in a tournament setting, if someone were to roll up with a Yisan or roll up with a Rogue Dex, I'm actually more scared of that Rogue pilot than I am of the Blue Farm player or the whatever top 5 list cEDH list player is at the table. Specifically because it takes a lot of skill to be really good at the Rogue deck, and players will sit with this certain statue or attitude, and you can tell if someone's really good at the game. Um, but honestly, just improving from a rogue deck perspective in a tournament setting is just to practice your list, goldfish a lot, play a lot of games, force yourself into uncomfortable metas, play against all Nas, play against all stacks, play against a mix of mid range and Nas. You really just want to learn as much as you can, and hopefully those situations from all these games will boost your skills in a tournament setting.
So when so when you're playing with like a newer player, right?
Mhm.
And like a new when a newer player, so because this is an experience that I had with like the Mox Masters tournament where I had some newer players kind of come up to me and they would be piloting what we're using like as quote unquote like a rogue deck, right?
Mhm.
And I like had some conversations with some players where they would tell me that they're like disappointed in the performance that the disappoint sorry, they're disappointed in the performance that their deck is putting on, right? And whether that be attributed to their skill as a pilot or the list itself, they would be like, man, I brought this list, I was really excited to play it, and now that the tournament's over, I came out with no wins, feeling really down on myself, didn't feel like I had an opportunity to win, and I just feel like I'm losing to better decks, right? Because like that's a sentiment that I hear a lot. Whether or not that's true, whether or not the decks that they're playing are truly better, this is just something that like these newer players like that's like it feels kind of like that like LGS pub stomp experience, right? Where like when you're
Mhm.
playing EDH and someone brings a high powered deck and you guys just the whole table gets wrecked and you're like, well, that felt like no fun. Sometimes in cEDH you have games that just feel that way.
Mhm.
So like what kind of sentiments do you give to those types of players that are not finding satisfaction in those lists? Do you just tell them like, well, let's take this list and let's hone in on it and try to take it as far as we can? Or do you express the sentiment like maybe there's just a better deck that you could be playing?
It's no, I tell them that in an ideal setting in a cEDH event or in cEDH in general, the ideal win rate is 25%. If you can hit a 25% win rate in cEDH, you are statistically like perfect, I guess. It is hard to maintain a win rate much higher than 25%, just the nature of a 4-player format. Um, and if you're hitting exactly a 25% win rate, you could easily go on like 12 to 17 game losing streaks, right? Like that is in the cards. If you effectively play like 300 games a year, right? About one game a day, like there are, it's definitely possible to just lose like 12 games in a row. And if you happen to show up to a cEDH tournament and you play and you lose like 4 games in a row, right? That's fine. Like you just didn't get lucky. Maybe I don't know the exact details on it, but like players have to realize that as long as they're making a 25% win rate overall, maybe they just had a bad weekend and they were just losing a bunch of games. Um, but that's that. I'm very forgiving to rogue decks because the deck I play, a lot of franchise players would just consider rogue, and uh, I don't know. I think it's fun.
So why don't you speak a little bit on that point specifically? So what is the main deck that you pilot, and what is the archetype, right? Because this is kind of what
Yeah.
you're well known for.
So I play Curious Control. It's Thrasios File Smasher control. Control is really hard to define in cEDH, but I'm really just trying to answer. I'm only trying to answer the threats at the table. So I'm not answering other people's forms of advantage. I'm not answering your acceleration or whatever, I'm only answering the Naws, I'm only answering the Underworld Breach. It's trying to slowly build value, and eventually, once everyone else is out of gas, because decks tend to be built so greedily that if you can answer the Naws, those decks are stuck on top deck mode and they're just hitting rituals and artifacts. But until they hit that tutor or a regrowth effect to get their Naws back, it's really hard for those decks to turn from a win after they've been stopped once or twice. Um, and when building pure control, every card is gas. I'm not running a whole lot of rituals. I'm not running a whole lot of cantrips. It's basically just all counter spells and card draw. And so once the ball gets rolling, it's very hard to stop.
Cool. Now, Thrasios Vow Smasher is a 4-color list, though, right? So
yes.
your sand's white.
Mm-hmm.
So now, would you consider your deck more of a rogue deck than, say, like a monocolored list or something like that, just because people don't enjoy the strategy as much? Or is it like, because I wouldn't consider, like, personally, right, like I wouldn't consider Curious Control a rogue deck because it sits in that sort of like 4-color soup kind of bubble that like a lot of decks sit in, where it's like it's 4 colors, it's got commanders that can accrue card advantage and say more than just like these are for colors. Yeah. And that usually is like good enough to progress your game a lot faster than like a lot of other strategies can. So like from a personal standpoint, do you feel like Curious Control is a rogue deck, or do you feel like it performs on a much higher level?
So I would say that Thrasios Vial Smasher is a very established deck, but there are so many different ways to build Thrasios Vial Smasher, and my favorite way to play cEDH is hard stop draw go control. And that archetype specifically, I would call rogue, because it's really hard concept to grasp. I've tried on numerous occasions to describe the play patterns of this list to people, and they just don't listen. And so it's only possible to show it by playing. And I, not rogue in the sense of like some weird mono blue like land combo deck, but it's definitely more of fringe established cEDH. I mean,
Cool.
it's fringe in the sense that I can really run whatever win con that I want. I've been brewing a lot recently, and I think the newest version that I'm on is it's called Curious Control Proactive Updated 6.6, and it's a Doomsday Underworld Breach deck that has some dredge lines in it.
Oh,
And
interesting.
I've goldfished it a couple times, and I'm liking it so far. I'm not sure if I'm going to build this in paper, but like it's the same like shell, the same concept. The game theory of I just want the game to go long. I want to be able to hit critical mass and just win from this point. But you can swap the actual win con cards out all the time. So you could be Thoracle, Doomsday, Hullbreaker Horror, Niv Mizzet combo, and Underworld Breach. You could do Hermit Druid stuff. Like the actual win doesn't really matter. It's the mindset that comes to playing the deck.
Do you think that there's like an inherent advantage to that, to having a deck where the win con could be basically anything? I hear,
Yeah.
yeah, because I hear a lot of people like kind of attest to the fact that like when you bring any 4-color deck to a table and you sit down at a table, even a deck like Timna Krom, there's the inherent advantage of like this deck can win in multiple different ways, and I don't know what way it's going to try to win. Specifically, like with like lists like that I pilot, because I'm a big Timna Thras player, and like with decks like that, it's like, okay, are you gonna Naz me? Are you gonna just like do creature tutor effects? Are you gonna? It could be Sacred Guide. It could be this. It could be that. And there is like an inherent advantage to not knowing what deck I'm bringing to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you play like a lot of those high color lists, like that's kind of balances out with that same advantage that rogue decks have, right? Because with a rogue deck, no one knows what you've brought to the table for the most part. Like the really well enfranchised players are going to know what your deck does, but like when you bring a rogue deck to the table, there's like that inherent, like they call it brewer's advantage, right?
Mhm.
Where because you've brought this deck that people aren't familiar with, you have an inherent advantage in the game, and that'll help you boost your win percentage. I feel like the same kind of applies to a lot of 4 color lists, because you can brew them in so many different ways, that it kind of brewer's advantage almost is very minimal, if any, at a common cEDH table. Um,
Mhm.
Aside from like the ROG size, where like if someone's bringing ROG size stacks, like power to you, man. But that's pretty that's pretty out there
Yeah.
compared to like what's standard, you know. So like, do you
Yeah.
feel that advantage when you're playing?
Um, yes, I mean it's definitely a relevant advantage when I'm playing Curious Control. Like, if I'm playing my paper list, I don't update that as often as I should. But if I'm ever playing on Moxfield, my playgroup knows that I'm bringing something wacky to the table. Um, because there, as I said earlier, there's so many different ways to win a game of Magic. There are so many different combo cards you could be playing that um, the game advice I'd give when you go to play against a 4 color deck and you don't know what they're bringing is just to attack their card draw. And if someone develops a Crom on turn 1, just try to Pyroblast it, try to Elemental Blast that shit. Like, you really have to keep them from getting into the game, if you don't know what their win con is.
Hmm.
So.
Yeah. So kind of harkening back now to like the tournaments and like the tournament meta and the things that are going on, we have like
Mhm.
a lot of tournaments kind of up and coming, specifically like real soon here in these next couple of months. So one that's like really well, the closest tournament obviously is going to be Chaos 5. Now, you're doing a seminar tomorrow, so you're probably not participating in Chaos 5, correct?
No, I don't. I got work and the thing. I'm not
Yeah,
doing anything with
yeah,
chaos.
because
But
your schedule's pretty busy. I know that I'll be playing in Chaos 5, and it's going to be very interesting to see, like in comparison to the other tournaments that have been kind of going around, because Chaos 5 or Chaos in general, Chaos tournaments, they kind of have like a little bit of an established meta. There's like a large subgroup of players that like exist in the online community that consistently play in these tournaments, and bring a lot of variety in the type of decks that they play. But since Chaos, I mean, we're on the 5th tournament now, has been kind of existing for a while, the decks that you see are a little bit more well established than, say, in other tournaments. I bring this up because recently what was announced was Mox Masters 2, which is the Playing with Power cEDH circuit. And that tournament is going on December 3rd. And in the last Mox Masters, there was a lot of like first time tournament players, which was really amazing and like really cool to see, because the format is really, you can tell that it's like reaching to a lot of new people. And with Playing with Power itself, like there's a lot of people that like solely exist in Playing with Power space, like in their Discord, or they watch their channel and they don't really explore things outside of that. So to see there's like so many new faces in the community kind of get involved in cEDH tournaments was really, really cool to see. So I'm kind of curious, kind of just like theorizing about Mox Masters 2, if we're going to see like a um, similar grouping of players, like if like, because there's like some benefit and then a lot of disadvantages to having like new players in like tournament games.
mm,
There's something to be said about like when you're playing in a cEDH event, when everyone is like very well enfranchised in the meta and in the game, that you're kind of playing on a different axis than when you're playing with people that aren't so confident in the decisions that they're making. And I think like you probably experience this a lot because you play in a lot of different servers. Specifically, you play a lot in the Playing with Power server. And so like every
mhm.
once in a while, you'll get games with players who are really, really new to the game. And it kind of changes the whole entire vibe of the game, because now there's well, for one, there's like an entire political game that's brought on upon that. And then also like there's a lot of teaching moments that come into play when you're playing with people that are just getting into the format. I don't know if you want to
Yeah.
elaborate on like any experiences with that or anything.
Usually, when I hop into a game on Playing with Power, I try not to play games on Playing with Power by myself, so I always like bully a friend into coming to play with me. But when I'm in there looking for game and we we do get like a brand new player or an unskilled pilot in our pod, immediately my first thought is, oh, this is a free win. And or like, oh, this person is going to learn a lot from this game. Because really new players, they haven't been experienced to aggressive politics yet. I would highly recommend, if you are new to the cEDH metagame, or you're just new to cEDH in general, and you're listening to this Twitch stream, go like play games and get politicked, because it's the only way to improve your politicking skills, is to just feel terrible about the decisions you make moments after you made those decisions. Because someone will talk to you for like 5 minutes about like, oh, you should really counter this, you should remove this, or like, I think you're doing the right thing here, and then you know cast a spell, target's declared, you're like, all right, it's good, pass priority on it or whatever, like I'm not holding priority, and it's like, you can't take that back now, it's done, and the other person just won because you made the bad play. And it's like, I don't know, I love politicking players, I love politicking new players and in franchise players, it's so much fun. But it is a teaching moment, like you will learn if you get politicked like crazy.
Yeah, something that like I've tried to do a lot is like especially like in tournament games, like in a tournament game, like as mean as it sounds, I'm not giving you any advice, right? Like you're kind of
if you get advice in a tournament, don't listen to that advice. Because if another player in a cEDH game tells you that what you're doing is the right decision, right? You really have to rethink that decision, because most likely it rewards the other player who's not spending anything from their hand more than it's rewarding you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And so like something that I'll do is like when a game goes south, right, for another player, for myself or anything like that, I like to try to be like, hey, before you guys go, let's have a conversation really quick. And like, I want you to run me through like what happened, what decisions you made, and you tell me where you think like you could have changed the outcome of the game. And usually that's like a good way for people to pick up on the idea of like, oh yeah, maybe I shouldn't have done this, or maybe I should have done this when I had this, right? And it's like, because like there's a lot of those instances where new players like, I don't know if I should be using my interaction here, and you have 3 people giving you their opinions whether or not you should use your interaction, and usually the person that's casting the spells that you want to interact with is the opinion you shouldn't be listening to. But
it's also you. If you ever sit down in a game of cEDH and you're like, someone casts like a Wheel of Fortune, right? Or not like a wheel's a bad example, but like a tutor, right? And I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh, I'm not sure if I should interact with this. You just admitted to interacting with the next threat at the table, right? The other 2 players, they're not going to talk. They're not going to use their counter spells first. You have volunteered information that you're going to interact with this. It's all on you.
Even if you don't like volunteer that information, right? Like even if you're like, if priority goes to you and you're like, and then like you just pause for a second. That's a pickup.
That noise.
Yeah.
You make that noise and you got it. Like it's all you.
Yeah.
One advice I'll give to players is like, if the stack is really intense, if you find yourself getting stressed out about the game, like there's so much going on and like you could interact, you could go for something at instant speed, right? Put your cards face down on the table, put your hands on top of your head. Because if you're sitting there fidgeting with your lands, you're pre-tapping, you're looking at your cards constantly, every time an instant goes on the stack, you are going to get priority bullied. Put the cards on the table, put your hands on your head. You'll win a lot more games. People won't be able to pick up on those cues. I see way too many people, like every time like a Nas goes on the stack, and the first thing they'll do is pick up their hand and put their hand on their lands. And it's like, oh, all right, pass priority to that player because they have something going on for the spell. It's the really minor things. It's like tells in poker, right? You have to minimize them as much as you can.
No, I mean, I agree with that for sure. Like working on your tells in game and stuff like that will help you not feel disappointed in yourself after a game has moved on. But I think that like the importance of kind of discussing like with players that you can clearly see are new to the format is usually like a really good step in improving not only like your own experience as a player, but their experience as well. Because I don't know about you, but like when I sit down and play a cEDH game, especially when I play a tournament game, like what excites me the most is when I'm playing like a high level game. And you can tell when you're in a high level game where like before anything is like before anybody has to say anything to anybody, like first spell's put on the stack, everybody passes priority immediately. You know what I mean? Like and like everything's noted, people are representing their board state clearly and efficiently. Like those games where like you don't even have to like where there's almost no politics involved because everybody's just like very clearly stating what they're doing is like my favorite type of game.
Yeah.
It's nice when you get to farm free wins off of,
Yeah.
like unsuspecting players, but I enjoy it more when you're in a high level game that's really intense and it forces you to think differently because it's not as easy as, oh, I can abuse this player's lack of knowledge
Hmm.
to win a game. So
Yeah.
in saying that, uh, I'm sorry, just reading the chat. In saying that, what I really enjoy is helping new players get to that level. So when after a game, if a new player does feel like they've kind of been abused, right? Not like abused like in a serious way, but like that someone took advantage of them at the table for being inexperienced. I think I
Hmm.
think it's very important to kind of talk through them with that and just be like, hey, like where do you think you made mistakes? This is where I think you made mistakes. Like what information was unknown that you can tell me now that the game is over and we can kind of discuss like what might have been better, especially like in the last like 2 to 3 minutes after the game when everybody's kind of calmed down because like a lot of game decisions are made in the heat of the moment and like after a little bit of hindsight it's really easy to talk about it and kind of learn from it. I feel like those are like the really important learning moments, like
Oh
um
yeah. Having conversations after the game and telling people like, hey, like this is where you messed up here, or like this is the exact moment in which you know advantage shifted from you to the rest of the table because you did this thing poorly. Those conversations are super important to have, and being able to give advice on how to make those decisions better is a really important skill for both the enfranchised player and for the new player. Like has to actually hear that, accept that feedback, because a lot of new players, it's like, oh, they're telling me things, but I'm emotional and mad and I didn't win this game or someone countered my spell and then the next person untapped and won and like I just want to like storm off and go to bed. Um, in that situation, like you really got to calm down and be like, all right, what did I do wrong? How do I accept this feedback that people are telling me? Um, and that can be a really hard thing for new players to understand.
Yeah, something that I experienced in the last Mox Masters that I never had experienced before was like I sat down. I sat down at the table. I'm sitting at my desk all day during an online tournament, so I'm not really.
Yeah.
But like we loaded up our pod and we got ready to play. And when we got started, the first player that was going to be in first seat sat down and they just went, "Wow, my last game was so ass," and just started kind of complaining about the game that they had just had. And
Yeah.
they ended up having a terrible game in our game. And I sat with that player at the end because like it was like lunch break for the tournament, and I kind of talked with him, and I was like, "Hey, man, do you know where I think like you went wrong in this match?" And he was like, When do you think I made a mistake?" I was like, "I think when you sat down and you brought your last game into this game is like where you went wrong, because like you started this game with like such a negative mentality that there was no way you were going to win this game
Mhm.
because like you already were just in such a negative place. You no longer cared about winning the game." And like I think that that's like an experience that a lot of players don't really understand is like you can't dwell on like the not only the mistakes that other people make in your games but the mistakes that you make, especially in like a tournament setting, because as soon as you really start to dwell on those decisions, or you're like, man, I had a really bad time, or man, I got out politicked the last game and it cost me the game, and you kind of keep piling these things on and piling these things on, you're going to continue to have those experiences throughout the tournament because you're just going to be so negative on yourself and really
Mhm.
over analyzing the decisions you make to a point where it's there's diminishing returns. And I think it's something that like a lot of players don't have enough experience with to kind of really comprehend or grasp without someone actually telling them, you know?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I feel like you need to sit down after every game and just kind of like clear your mind and go into each brand new game with a blank slate. Basically, you have to throw grudges aside because I don't know. Somehow, if you in the cut to top 16 if you end up playing against a player that you lost to previously, and it's like, oh well, now I'm gonna like spite counter whatever they play on turn one. Um, it's just bad gameplay. What happens in another game, it happened in another game. You can't bring those emotions to the next game. You're going to lose.
Yeah, 100%. And you see that a lot, like in tournaments where maybe it's not the most competitive. So, like a good example of this was like the Cash Cards tournament.
Mhm.
I heard a lot of experiences from a lot of players that in that tournament setting, there was a lot of like, well, I lost to you in the last game, so I'm just going to make sure that you don't win this game. And it's like, wait, how does that boost your win percentage at all?
Yeah,
like at this point, we're just throwing games to make each other mad. And so, like, it's a really like,
especially
I
with the
think,
Lotus on the line. My God.
yeah, dude, I heard some crazy stories about like how people were playing. Um, and it just comes down to, I think, like, for one, like where EDH comes from inherently as a format is that there is a lot of like history of like, when you're playing like Zakama with your friends and someone counters your Zakama and then like you just the whole rest of the game like hate them out. You know what I mean? Where it's
Mhm.
like, that casual mindset still exists for a lot of players, especially players that are like just getting into the format and kind of establishing like, hey, for one, that's not how competitive players like. The goal is to win, so like you're not gonna win if you're just like spike countering everything. And
Mhm.
then two, just like learning when mistakes are acceptable and like it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to learn from them, is like a kind of a concept that's very hard to grasp and it's very hard to explain to newer players, I'd say, especially like in a tournament setting, because tournament settings for EDH is so new, like it's still in its like infant baby stage. So like
Mhm.
explaining that, like, hey, it's okay to fuck up and lose a game. There's 5 rounds. Like you only need to win 2 or 3 games to make it to top 16. Like it's not the end of the world. But yeah, that first game will like ruin people's lives, and then the rest of the tournament's basically just a wash.
Oh yeah. So, are there any tournament like which upcoming tournaments are you going to be playing in?
Uh,
Any like the in-person ones or?
yeah, I'll be at pretty much all of them because I'm a crazy person. So like for me, I know that I'll be at Silicon Dynasty because I'll be casting that tournament with my co-host Shauna, who once again can't be here today. Punt City 2, which is in Phoenixville, I'll be at that one as well, but I'll be playing in that one.
Mhm.
Okotoberfest, which is going on in like 3 weeks, I'll be at that one, also playing in it. And then there's like the cookout in Atlanta, which I'll be working, as well as the Windmill Slam in San Jose. I'll also be working. And then for all the online tournaments, I participate in every one that I'm allowed to participate. If it's not an Eminence event that I'm casting, I participate in it. That's just like my vibe. But I'm kind of a new era grinder. Like
Yeah.
I've been really invested in tournaments since I joined the community. But what about you? I know you were at Punt City. That was an awesome event. It was really fun to like finally get to meet you and
Yeah.
just like hash it out as friends and like have a good time. But like, are there any other events you plan on attending? Are there any events that you've got your eye on? What have you been thinking
Uh,
about?
I know there's a lot of people who wanted me to go to Oktoberfest later this month, but that's not in the cards right now. So I think I'm going to be going. I'll be attending Mox Masters 2, hopefully, and then Punt City 2 in March is like 100% guarantee. I'll be down for that.
Oh hell yeah! I know that Eminence. We also have like a. No, you have to correct me if I'm wrong here, Greg. But are you a
Mhm.
part of the Ohio crew, or where do you
I'm
sit?
in Southwest Michigan, so
Okay, so pretty
yeah, pretty
close.
close. A couple
Yeah,
hours away from Ohio.
I mean you're
So,
close to me. I'm in like mid. I'm in wait north. I'm in southeast Wisconsin, so like we're pretty close.
my God, wait, it's so close.
But
I could
uh,
take a boat to you in like 20 minutes.
basically, but they the Eminence has announced that they're going to do a nationals tournament at the end of the year. I believe it's going to be next December, but it's going to be in the Midwest. From what I can gather, it's going to be either like Illinois, Wisconsin, Ohio area. So that one's drivable at least. So
Yeah, no, I'll be going to that one if I make it to nationals somehow. But
yeah, I
I'm
don't know
not
if it's
sure what the qualifier is for that.
I don't know either. I don't know if it's an invitational. I don't know if it's like open to everybody, but it's called nationals. But it will be a really cool event. And then Seth in the chat is asking if either of us are going to Summit or PAX U.
No.
Summit was out of the cards for me. I could not make Summit. My wallet could not afford Summit.
Seth, if you want to pay for my flight and hotel and all my food there, yeah, I'm in. But
Oh my god, that's a lot to ask, Seth. No, but yeah, I know. Here, I can actually give a full list of all the Eminence events that are coming up. So, Silicon Dynasty is the next Eminence event that's happening. That's going to be in San Jose, California, January 13th through the 15th. Punt City 2 will be March 24th and 26th in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, which is where the last Punt City was, which was an amazing event. Best in-person event that I've been to. Then we have the Cookout in Atlanta, Georgia, July 28th through the 30th. Windmill Slam, September 23rd and 25th in San Jose, California. And then Chaos. Oh, no. Yeah. So that's it for the in-person events for Eminence, besides the Nationals, which hasn't been fully announced or determined yet. And then for like online events, we have Chaos 5, which is happening tomorrow, November 5th, sponsored by Spite Plays and Eminence MTG. If you win that, you get your, if you top four it, actually, you get your entry and a buy for Oktoberfest, which is really cool. So that's like a good event to get in if you can. And then Mox Masters 2 is on December 3rd. So that will be a really fun one. And I think a lot of people in the community are going to be a part of that one as well.
I'm looking forward to Mox Masters too. I think that's going to be fun.
Yeah, it should be good. The first one was like really, really fun. And now that they've kind of done it, got their, got it out under their system and they've done it before. I think the Playing with Power guys are going to do a really, really good job with Mox Masters too. I think the casting was really cool how they did it. And so like if they're going to be casting it again, seeing how they improve is going to be a really, really fun time, especially because like Ashani couldn't cast the last one. So if he can cast this one, it'll be like it'll be
nice.
Yeah, because it'd be Drake and Ashani doing some casting with like Mike Sad Robot like doing some too. It just seems like a really good time.
Seems like a great crew of people.
Yeah. So other than that, I know that we've filled our hour time slot here. But I just wanted to kind of discuss like some tournament philosophy, cEDH philosophy with you, get a grasp on how Greg, the Curious Control guy, kind of views the format a little bit, specifically the tournament side of it. Other than that, is there, I know you're doing your cEDHU seminar tomorrow. You have the Passing Priority podcast. If you want, drop your link in the chat and people can go check that out. I know that you've got 2 episodes up right now, right? Or do you have more?
3. We got an Animar cEDH deck tech that's up as of 10 o'clock this morning.
Sweet. That's awesome. Okay, that's why I didn't see it, because it came out today.
Yeah.
I was at work all day, so I didn't catch that one.
Oh, I was up until 2:30 last night finishing the editing and uploading.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So that link is dropped in the chat, so make sure you guys go check it out. It's a Passing Priority podcast. Really cool. Very like well done podcast, specifically since there's a lack of podcasts, in our community. So it's good.
There's a lot of podcasts, but there's not a lot of good podcasts.
There's not a lot of consistent podcasts. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
There's like right now in the podcast world, since you've entered, it's like Into the North, the Mind Sculptors, Sad Naws, and then you, if you're uploading on a consistent basis. Playing with Power has their podcast, but it's Patreon only, and it uploads like when they feel like recording an episode. Same with the Miscast. I love Mikey and Drake, but they also just like upload very inconsistently. So
the Past Priority podcast should hopefully upload an episode every Friday morning at 10 a.m. on YouTube and on Spotify. And after my current semester at my college ends, it'll be 2 episodes a week for 3 or 4 weeks, and then go back to the 1 episode a week thing. But
holy shit, man. Even 1 episode a week, man. Good power to you and good luck, because it's.
I'm really motivated for this project. Like it started a long time ago, and then it just like kept on hitting road bumps of like, oh god, I have to do all of this work. I don't want to do this all by myself. I can't pay people to help me with this, and luckily, I was able to convince some really nice friends to work on this project with me. And I don't know if they're listening to this, but you get paid eventually. So,
Well, hell yeah, man. Keep it up. And other than that, thank you again for checking us out and listening. Thanks to our sponsors, Moxfield and the Epic Storm, for helping us out and sponsoring Eminence and what we do. Make sure that you sign up for Silicon Dynasty, the next Eminence in-person event that will be going on in San Jose, California. I will be casting it. So make sure that you're there if you want to hang out with my dumbass and the rest of the Eminence crew and everybody in the California area that loves to play. I know we got some really cool people that might be attending. I know I talked to Joe Johnson last week from Tabletop Jocks. He's planning on coming. So like, there's a lot of
That'd be
cool
fun.
stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff in the works for Silicon Dynasty. So if you haven't already signed up, make sure that you do. Yeah, thank you so much, Greg, for coming on. This was a little bit last minute for you, I know. So I really
Yeah, it was a
appreciate
lot of
it.
fun though.
Yeah, it really helps us out. And I'll be checking out the seminar tomorrow and just keep checking out your podcast and supporting you where I can. So thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
All
All right.
right. And with that, we will sign off. Thank you, everybody.
Goodbye, internet. All right. That was